computer. So today we were lucky enough to have David Pepose on. He is doing Captain Planet, who's been gone for 20 years apparently, and he's coming back into the comic book realm. Done a whole bunch of other things. You've worked for Marvel, you worked for Mad Cave, you've worked for Aftershock. Mm-hmm. You've been in comic books for quite some time now. You seem to like the old cartoon characters is your bread and butter, it looks like. Yeah. Space Ghost, right?
Yeah.
Speed Racer. Mm-hmm. All those old cartoon characters that us older people love.
Yeah.
So tell us about Captain Planet and how it came across your plate and how you got started on Captain Planet, which comes out soon, right?
Yes, April 23rd, the day after Earth Day. So Captain Planet has actually been a white whale property for a long time for me. I've been pitching this book to every publisher in the industry.
Oh, so you want to do it? It went from you. Oh, that's great.
It was really a case of right place, right time. For me, Captain Planet, for those who aren't familiar with the original cartoon, because it has been off the air for 30 years. So, we are really kind of bringing this thing back into the 21st century. It's the story of 5 ordinary people from around the world that are given the 5 elemental rings of Gaia that allow them to bend the elements of earth, fire, wind, water, and heart. Mm-hmm. And when these Planeteers combine their rings, they summon this immortal elemental demigod known as Captain Planet. Mm-hmm. And so they went on adventures. They stopped the eco-villains from basically wreaking environmental disaster. It was really kind of a pioneering form of edutainment in 1990, spearheaded by Ted Turner and Barbara Pyle. And I think that cartoon often gets a bad rap for being a product of its time and not being particularly subtle with its politics. And for me, I feel like those are 2 very easy things to navigate because, first off, reality has gotten a lot less subtle in the last few years. I feel like the Planeteers message was seen largely in the hypothetical back in 1990, and now I think the world has sort of caught up in perhaps some unfortunate ways. And I think as a result, we're able to kind of take those core building blocks, and it doesn't take much to sort of reintroduce them in the year of 2025. And so for me, Captain Planet, I've been pitching this book for almost a decade, and it's because I feel like it has all the building blocks for success. It has this cast that is inherently diverse and multicultural in a way that I don't think we've seen done this organically since the days of giant-sized X-Men. Mm-hmm. And then the threats they face are so timely. It's not just environmental change, it's environmental disaster. I live in Los Angeles. We just had the wildfires. Right. I lived in New York during Hurricane Sandy. My parents live in the Midwest. They had 15 tornadoes hit in one day just a few weeks ago. It's a disaster movie that we're all extras in. Mm-hmm. And on the flip side of that, what's fueling all this? It's human greed. And that's something that Captain Planet always really tackled in a way that I would say not only was forward thinking but downright subversive. And I think that finally pop culture's caught up to it. I've pitched this book as X-Men meets Avatar: The Last Airbender, and by being able to kind of inject these bits of pop culture that didn't, they either didn't exist or weren't as prevalent in the way that they were in 1990, we're able to really kind of not just like tell a story that feels dynamic and timely, but also just like it's cool. The action is interesting. The Planeteers each are being able to leverage their elemental powers in really cool and visually distinct ways. And so you do all that and it's like, oh, like this is an overlooked character that I think it deserves his long overdue spotlight. I think Captain Planet and the Planeteers are really the kinds of heroes that meet today's moment. And so I consider myself very fortunate, very grateful, and I see the responsibility of the story that me and artist Aman Casales are trying to tell. And I'm loving every minute of it.
So what do you think made Dynamite finally say yes to it after 10 years of pitching it to different companies? Why did Dynamite say yes to you?
Well, it really was a case of right place, right time. I've been writing for Dynamite for about a year and a half now on Space Ghost, right. And that's gone really well. The sales have been great, the reviews have been great, and so thank you. I happen to be at the right place at the right time. Dynamite had actually picked up the rights to Captain Planet before we ever discussed it. So it was at San Diego Comic-Con last year that I got the press release saying that they were expanding their agreement with Warner Brothers Discovery to include things like Captain Planet and Thundar the Barbarian, and
Yes, they just had that. We just had the right of that on also.
yeah,
We love these Dynamite series that are coming.
yeah,
Silverhawks. They have so many of these old cartoons coming out that we as kids loved.
yeah. I think the deal that Dynamite has made with Warner Brothers has been a real win-win on both sides, and so I got that press release at San Diego, and I saw Nick Barucci, my publisher, and Joe Rybant, my editor, on the other side of BarCon, and I just walked up to them with my phone with the press release saying, "Do you have somebody in Captain Planet? Because if you don't, it has to be me."
Yeah.
And yeah, so I consider myself really fortunate. I say that like Space Ghost, it has a lot of shared DNA with Batman, and I'd say this has a lot of shared DNA with the X-Men, of being able to have these kind of five ordinary people that are suddenly granted extraordinary power and who find themselves on the run from a corrupt billionaire that looks to exploit them. So it does feel very timely here, 2025.
Right now. Mm-hmm.
But there's that X-Men kind of sense of like these are the scrappy underdogs that are always on the back foot, and how do they kind of squeak out a victory and make it to the next battle? And that's going to be a lot of what we show, particularly in this big origin story that we have planned.
So tell us, Captain Planet is going for how long? What's the?
Yeah, so we are kind of taking it arc by arc, both in terms of just like to make sure what the interest is, and also like what's my sanity and bandwidth looking like.
So it's not it's not a limited series. It's going to be a monthly.
Yes. So we're just kind of figuring out exactly how long that runway is going to be. We're going to see sort of how the first arc does, and then if there's the demand is there, and my sanity can keep it up, we'll definitely do more. But if our origin story takes place over the course of 6 issues, and if that winds up being all we have, you're going to get a really strong beginning, middle, and end for it. Like we're not leaving anything on the table, but there are some villains kind of in the back pocket that if we continue,
you have something planned.
Yeah,
so I have a comic book question because I am enjoying, like I said, the Dynamite comic books. I really like Silverhawks, really enjoying Thundar. Are you doing an ash can for Captain Planet as well?
Yeah, I believe that dropped like a week or so ago.
No comic shops have these. It's just I picked up the one for Herculoids.
Yeah.
And it was just random. We were somewhere and I was like, oh, what is that? And I was like, it's the Herculoids ash can.
I think it probably flew under the radar a little bit just with like all the goings on at Diamond right now. But I know it exists. I've seen photos of it. I do not have a copy myself.
Right.
But I know it exists. But yeah, honestly, if you've missed out on the ash can, it's no big deal. Just pick up issue 1.
Okay.
Third.
I like the ash can size. I think the weirdness of that small ash can makes it unique, and they're so limited. It's harder to get, and the comic collector in me is speaking now, though. So I have another question about that. I'm a fan of the Dynamite lines that are coming out, and I know that they've been really impacted by Diamond. Mm-hmm. Nothing seems to be getting to us on the time it's supposed to come. I know Herculoids was late by 2 or 3 weeks. Sure. So with you guys, do you anticipate Captain Planet is going to hit on the 23rd, or?
That's my understanding. I know final order cutoff was yesterday for that first issue, so everything's scheduled for that. I mean, of course, like the diamond of it all, like sometimes, unfortunately, that's well beyond my pay grade. But yeah, I mean, everything's scheduled for the 23rd, as far as I've been made aware. I know we are really committed to hitting our Earth Day.
That's a big deal for you.
Yeah, for this book. So yeah, I think of course we're living in these unprecedented times, but I do believe that is the plan. Is that book is coming out on that day as scheduled.
How many variant covers? 25.
There's the 4 main covers. We have a Mark Spears cover for our A cover. Jay Lee is doing a set of connecting covers for our B cover.
Oh, that's cool.
Christian Ward, a buddy of mine, really talented artist. He's doing our C covers, and then Ben Oliver is sort of rounding us out with our D covers.
Nice.
And then I know that there's like sort of the various permutations of those covers.
Blank cover, silver blank cover.
Yeah, the foil covers, the black and whites, the virgins.
Yeah.
But yes, it's those four main covers, and then I think it's sort of the choose your own adventure if you want anything special beyond that.
Right. Yeah, we've been around comics a long time, and we're kind of amazed that like this whole variant thing is kicking up the way it did way back.
Yeah,
and seeing them all like. One of the recent comics we talked about had like 50 variant covers or some insane G.I. Joe. Joe some like insane amount of covers. So it's a curious thing to know. Like, I wonder, 4 seems sensible. Like 4 is sensible. But once we get to like 25, it starts to get like crazy, Because there's people who will buy all 25. Yeah. We'll have to find all 25. Yeah. And that's the hard part of collecting. Are we losing you?
No. No. I'm definitely I'm still here. I can hear you. It's one of those things. That's a question for smarter minds than mine, who probably have the bigger picture than you do.
So for you, you're doing Space Ghost and now you're doing Captain Planet. Is there a plan for a crossover between Space Ghost and Captain Planet down the road?
Never say never. No plans at the moment, but my buddy Tom Hoskison drew a fun little crossover image. Okay. The two of them when we announced Captain Planet, and so there is kind of like a Batman Superman kind of quality to them. Definitely. Our Space Ghost especially, he's got some rough edges. He's got a little bit of a temper. He does not mind putting the hurt on somebody if they deserve it. Whereas our Captain Planet is, very much a reassuring figure in the vein of like a Superman or a Captain America, just kind of with metamorphose powers. So that would be an interesting dynamic. I do think the only challenge is that they really do come from, two separate worlds, no pun intended, in that, Space Ghost is very much that classic Silver Age, Buck Rogers kind of sci-fi. Yeah. Whereas Captain Planet is very much rooted in the world outside our window. And so how do you kind of navigate that? How do you navigate a world where the Planeteers know what like a space monkey looks like? Right. So never say never. But it's not on the agenda currently, but I think right now the agenda for me is just like getting the main stories out before
getting Captain Planet off the ground and running and hopefully successful. So with Space Ghost, Space Ghost is a very interesting character, just because of the fact that he's the character from the 80s that us 80s kids love, and then in the 90s he has that resurgence in the interview show, Space Ghost Coast to Coast.
Goes all the way back to the 60s.
Yeah. So he's been around for so long. How did you end up with Space Ghost?
Yeah, so Space Ghost happened. I've been on Dynamite's radar for a while. I've known Nick Barucci since my early days as comics journalist. Okay. And so every time, when I made the jump to becoming a writer, there are always editors that I would reach out to, just being like, hey, I have a new book out. I would reach out to like Tom Brevoort and CB Cebulski at Marvel, and I would reach out to Nick and a few other, people, Mike Martz, who, over at Aftershock, and then when he jumped to Mad Cave. And so I had just done Moon Knight City of the Dead, and I had just announced my Punisher miniseries. And Dynamite felt like I'd kind of hit a critical mass in terms of like my output, and so they had just announced their Warner Brothers Discovery deal at New York Comic Con. I guess it was 2 years back. Mm-hmm. They had just announced Declan Shalvey and Drew Moss on Thundercats, and so Joe Rybant, my editor, reached out and said, "Are you going to be at the con? We'd love to chat." And he said, "Listen, based on what you've done with Moon Knight, based on what you're doing with Punisher, would you have any interest in Space Ghost?" And for me, I grew up in the 90s, so like I missed a lot of the heyday of Space Ghost. Like Coast to Coast was my original
sure yeah
It wasn't until my first internship in the industry in '06 when I read Joe Kelly and Ariel Olivetti's kind of Batman Begins kind of origin story on the character. And I remember thinking like, oh, that's interesting. Like he's an actual superhero. Like, I kind of filed that away.
Yeah.
So when Joe reached out and asked me about Space Ghost, I watched a couple of the original episodes just to kind of get my feet wet. And I was so struck at how Jan and Jason Blip, they were core parts of the story. Like you meet them before you meet Space Ghost. in that
Right.
first episode.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's an interesting story. That's something that hasn't been told yet. Of like, how do these sidekicks wind up in this vigilante's orbit? And
Yeah.
how do they kind of go from being these orphan rescues to becoming his sidekicks, to becoming his trusted partners, to becoming this found family in their own right? And that was really interesting to me. It kind of reminded me a little of like Kurt Busiek's confession arc from Astro City, a little bit of Dr. Grant and Tim and Lex's dynamic from the first Jurassic Park.
Mm-hmm.
And then with all the cool Alex Toth villains, there's a little bit of Long Halloween in there where you're able to kind of introduce each of the villains before you bring them together in this super group as the Council of Doom.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, that's really cool and interesting. It lets me kind of write the superhero stuff to like the best of my abilities, without necessarily dealing with some of the structural hurdles that a shared universe often entails. You know, I don't have to necessarily consult with anybody about, hey, I want to use Zorak. You know, or nobody's going to tell me, hey, Creature King's actually being used elsewhere, so you can't use them.
Yeah.
So it is really kind of the best of both worlds. And yeah, getting to work with artist Jonathan Lau. I've been a huge fan of his since his work on Green Hornet with Kevin Smith. That was that was one of the first Dynamite books I ever read back in 2009. So yeah, you know, he's fantastic. He's such a gifted storyteller, and he really elevates kind of every page. So yeah, it really did feel like the stars aligning in a lot of ways. And I think that book really changed the course of my career in ways that I certainly didn't anticipate, and ways that I'm still kind of seeing today.
That's cool. Yeah, it's good. And like I said, I've read the Space Ghost series. I read the first 5 issues. Great. And I really enjoyed them. I didn't I bought it because I have like a very nostalgic feel about Space Ghost from the 80s, but watching the repeats of the 60s ones. So I figured check it out, you know, and I was so pleasantly surprised by how good it was. And I have to say, just based on that, I'm really looking forward to seeing what you do with Captain Planet.
You know, my philosophy for a lot of these things is, I think there's often a misconception with these nostalgia properties where there are some people who say you got to do basically a direct continuation.
Yeah.
What happened in the 60s or the 80s. And I understand that sort of purist mentality, but it's one that I gently reject, in that if you do that, you're only preaching to the choir. Right. You know, you're only preaching to the old heads who are like, well, I loved Space Ghost in 1960 or the 60s, and I loved, Space Stars, the revival in the 80s. Yeah. Same thing for Speed Racer, where, it's like, oh, well, I love the original 60s run. But for me, that feels like I'm showing up to a party like 40 to 60 years late, and then trying to beat somebody at their own game that has already been well calcified. So for me, it's how do you take the bones of these things? It's not taking liberties for the sake of liberties. It's okay, like, what's the important landmarks here? How can we add like just a tiny bit of polish to make it sparkle like new? What are the kind of little wrinkles and twists we can throw in? But most importantly, it's how do we tell a story that feels like a Space Ghost story? It feels like a Speed Racer story. Using the storytelling mode of 2025, and I think that really opens the doors up. Of course, there'll be the occasional purist who's like, I wanted what I wanted, the original. I just wanted a continuation of that. And my response is, the DVDs still exist. Nothing I write is going to change that. But I think it opens up the door to a much wider readership of people who are like, I've heard of Space Ghost. I don't really know what his deal is. I've kind of heard it a little bit through pop culture osmosis. Oh, there's potential here. There's something really cool. And getting them to become Space Ghost fans as a result. And I think it becomes a win-win, because I have seen pretty overwhelmingly seeing a lot of just old school Space Ghost fans who are like, you're treating this character with such respect and really bringing him into the 21st century. And so, that I think is the way to kind of like crack these nostalgia books and make them interesting, both as a reader and for me as a writer. I have no interest in retreading what's been done. But if I can kind of add like something that feels a little personal to me and feels new, then I feel like I've done my job, and it gives the book, I think, a little bit more of a fighting chance to really stand out on its own merits.
Well, Dynamite is having so much success with these, like you said, Thundercats is doing great. And Silverhawks has been fantastic. Hercules is really good, and now you have Space Ghost, and it's working, because I think with what you said, that it's not a retread, it's bringing it up to date for old fans and new fans. And they've been selling really well.
I feel fortunate to be a part of that wave, and I feel like people like Daniel Warren Johnson really spearheaded it with Transformers,
Right.
and then you see Declan Shalvey on Thundercats and Joshua Williamson on GI Joe. So I feel fortunate to be kind of a part of that wave. I think readers, I think it's an unfortunate bit of social media culture and spoiler culture is that readers, especially when they're so invested in the big two, they're less present in the story. I think they're trying to anticipate it, and then it becomes a lose-lose because either you've anticipated it, and so it takes the wind out of the reveal, or it's not what you anticipated, and then you get mad because you feel like the story math isn't adding up.
Yeah.
And I feel like something like Space Ghost, something like Speed Racer, or something like Thundercats or GI Joe, or Transformers for that matter, the mythology isn't so mined that readers are jaded. And so they're able to be a little bit more surprised by it. They're a little bit, it's easier to be a little more present with it.
Yeah.
And so, I think readers are looking to be surprised ultimately.
Yeah. Sometimes against their own wishes.
Yeah. And I think sometimes they're so used to reading the tea leaves, they're so used to kind of getting spoiler leaks or set photos or what have you, listening to the rumor mongers, that it's I think detracts from the enjoyment of the story.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that's I think I feel very fortunate to be in the place that I'm at, because it does feel like a little bit of a more old school approach. Where we're able to kind of tell a good story based on fundamentals and not necessarily sort of kind of trying to chase whatever trend is going on, or trying to pull whatever immediate sales levers there are. It's just can I deliver a good comic on a month-to-month basis?
And that's what we want as comic fans. We want good comics.
Yeah. It's a good opportunity, I think, to kind of break some new territory in the readership, and hopefully give everybody working on big two books, myself included. I'm working on Cable right now.
Right.
It hopefully kind of relieves a little bit of the pressure and gives the big two superheroes also room to find themselves and reinvent themselves and break new territory in the way that Ultimate's line and Absolute line have been doing, and looking even towards the X-Men relaunch and other bits of the lines.
Yeah, great point, because the Ultimate and Absolute lines are the best two lines that the companies. Marvel's is Ultimates and DC is Absolute. They're the best comic book coming out of there right now, and they're so different than anything they've done in years.
Yeah.
The industry's changing.
Yeah. It's definitely, look, change is the only constant, and it always comes in waves. But I feel like seeing kind of the resurgence of the licensed books, I think it does speak of, there's no fatigue here. I don't think there's any fatigue. I think the hunger for the storytelling is there. It just happens that we're in a particular moment where these reinventions are really popular. And
they really are. So do you spend a lot of time just watching Cartoon Network and saying, oh, what could the next property? Oh, wait, I could do that. Let me see. Because Thunder the Barbarian would be a great comic book. I'm just saying.
For me, now that I've had my feet under me in terms of licensed books for a while, and so I do feel like now I'm in a position, I'm a little pickier with it, just because I only have so much bandwidth. I only have so much time, and I
don't know how you have time to sit and talk to us right now. You're writing so much.
This is my one interview of the day, and then I'm back to writing Space Ghost immediately after this. It's so for me, it's always just is there an emotional connection? Is there something that I can kind of mine to get me to like the characters? When you're earlier in your career, you take everything because you don't know when you're going to get over.
You have to, right?
Know what's going to catch on. But I think I'm lucky enough that I'm finally at a spot in my career where I can sort of say okay, does this feel like a value add? Does this feel like something that will come naturally to me? And so I've been really fortunate in that I've got Space Ghost, and I love that book. I'm writing it for at least a little while longer. By the time that we inevitably wrap up that book, that's going to be a nice, good long run. Mm-hmm. And, and like Captain Planet, I feel no matter what we do, as far as what we've got right now, that's going to be a really good story.
Right.
and Speed Racer is another good long runway. And so there's not a whole lot of other cartoons. Like it would have to be something that feels on par.
Thunder the Barbarian. Come on.
You know, you know, there's a few like Turtles, of course. I love the Turtles. I bleed green. What I wouldn't do to write the Turtles.
Right.
You know, Voltron could be interesting. I remember actually having a conversation many years ago before my writing days involving Voltron that didn't work out. You know, yeah, you know, it's a never say never kind of thing. It's just, you know, it's just making sure that I have some sort of connection to it and that I can find a way in without killing myself over it.
Right.
You know, because it's one of those things you want to put in 110% into all your books. And I think it becomes, especially when you're juggling multiple books, as I've learned over the last year and change, you want to make sure that like you're picking properties that you know you can give 100% to, and that you're not going to twist yourself in knots trying to figure all that out. Because life's too short, and also like you're only as good as your last book. And so you want to make sure that whatever books you're turning in, you're able to kind of deliver to the best of your ability.
So how hard is that from a writing standpoint? You're writing Captain Planet right now, Space Ghost, and Cable. How is it to shift gears and say, today I'm writing Space Ghost? I'm spending 3 hours on this, and now I have to finish Cable though. And now, how hard is it to write multiple books at the same time?
It's a matter of triage. You know, you got to keep up with your artists, and you got to keep them fed, and knowing kind of which artists are fast and which ones are not, are less fast, I should say. And so you're able to kind of guesstimate, like, okay, like I know I turned in an issue of Captain Planet. I've got 4 to 5 weeks to turn in another.
Okay.
Whereas like Space Ghost, I turn in an issue of that, and I know Jonathan's going to finish in like 3 weeks. So like I gotta like double time that, but also knowing that like if God forbid like I'm a little late, I know Jonathan moves so fast he will catch up. So you kind of do it based on that. You know, for me, I try to I have kind of like a hard minimum of like I have to dialogue 4 pages a day at least, and if I can do more than that, that is the cherry on top. You know, and I'm looking to kind of keep increasing that, you know.
So you're doing 4 of one title. So you're picking that one title, and that's today.
Yeah, I mean, I pick whichever title like is due next. You know, that's sort of how I do it. Yeah, you know, I mean, there's nothing like a deadline to kind of keep the pressure on and kind of force you to stay on task. And yeah, I think beyond that, it's just you sort of build your life around like, okay, how do I, you know, I have an office. I stay in my office. I treat it like a job. You know, I even down to things like, you know, you got to stay hydrated. You got to like not eat junk food. You got to take your vitamins. It feels a little bit like being a professional athlete sometimes.
You're not allowed to go outside. I get it. Stuff like
that. Well, it's like, it's one of those things. It's like you do, but like, all right, you got to do like, if you're doing it, you're doing your 20-minute walk, you know, like you're getting some fresh air, you're getting some vitamin D, you're getting the blood pumping, you know, you go to the gym, you know, I go 3 times a week. And so I think beyond that, it's just, you know, you stagger the projects as best you can. And, I do, you plan in advance. You know, I outline a lot. I outline very deeply. When I turn in outlines, I tend to do it not just issue to issue, but I have a beat sheet page to page.
Okay.
And usually that beat sheet is pretty accurate. You know, sometimes it'll shift like a page or two, but that way, like, you know, you just break it down. You know, it's like, okay, this day I'm going to be paneling this issue. Okay. And then it's like, okay, now that the paneling's done, I just chip away at the dialogue until it's done. And I've found different hacks to like make it a little faster on myself. But yeah, it's always an ongoing process. I will say it's much easier to write books that feel tonally different. I actually prefer that. Yeah. I had a jag a couple years ago. I was writing Moon Knight City of the Dead and Punisher and Devil That Wears My Face concurrently. Yeah. And that was really challenging in that these are 3 books that felt tonally in a very similar place, kind of these, you know, dark kind of street level, you know, like single or double lead kind of stories. that was challenging. Whereas like what I'm doing right now, like Space Coast feels very different than Captain Planet, which feels very different than Speed Racer, and so which feels very different than Cable, and so they all have like it feels like different muscle groups in a way. So I prefer that. Just so I'm not like hammering on the same like kind of mental space too much and exhausting myself.
Yeah, you are writing a lot, and just for the background of why you're on the show is what happens. We come across a creator that we really like, something that you worked on, and I saw that you had Captain Planet coming out, but you wrote Savage Avengers, and I loved Savage Avengers. I thought Savage Avenger was fantastic.
Thank you.
He's the same guy who wrote Savage Avengers. Let's see if he'll. And it always amazes us when you guys say yes.
Yeah, we're always like,
oh wow.
Savage Avengers was such a fun book.
Savage Avengers was really well done, and it couldn't have been easy bringing all of them into a book. It was very, that was a very different book compared to most of the stuff that was out there at the time.
Yeah, it felt a lot like it felt like, I was saying I pitched it as like, this is my Defenders. And I talked a lot about Defenders. I talked about Al Ewing's Mighty Avengers when I pitched it. I talked about Rick Remender's Uncanny Avengers. It was my first Marvel book. And so, there's that feeling of like, wow, okay, I can tell my life just changed, that like my career trajectory just changed. And working with Carlos Magno on that book, he was the perfect artist for it. And that was the beginning of my relationship with Tom Brevoort, who, an amazing editor who I've worked with more or less unbroken since that book. So we're running on, it's like 3 years now. And so, I love that book. I in a lot of ways, Captain Planet kind of feels like the next version of that book. Okay. It's a little less off kilter in terms of the cast, but I think the team dynamics, the personalities bouncing off of each other, I think is very, I love that book in that there are certain things I would do differently. Like there are certain things that, it's your first book. There's a certain learning curve that happens when you hit at Marvel, where you don't get to fuss quite as much as you do in a creator-owned book, and you're working with a publisher who they have their own way of doing things, and you kind of have to catch up. And so, I look back, there are certain things I would do a little differently now that I have like the experience that I have now. I probably write a little less, but
you're saying there's going to be another Savage Avengers. Is that what you just said? I'm kidding.
If there is, I'm not involved. I would love to listen. I would love to take another bite at that apple. I would have written that book for 100 issues if the market would support it.
It was a lot of fun. It really was.
But thank you. Yeah, Marvel's great, and I've really enjoyed, the fact that I feel like I've been able to play with most of the toys over there at some point. The Avengers. I wrote Avengers Unlimited. I wrote 2 arcs of that. I've written Guardians. I've written the Fantastic Four. I got to write Spider-Man once, which is like, I could die happy. They let me write Darth Vader once. Like that's
you've had some great characters.
As a fan, that feels like, like alpha nerd bragging rights.
Yeah.
So
especially Vader.
It's I love working at Marvel, and I just finished up my run on Cable there, my miniseries for that. I don't know what's next over there, but my plate is so full at the moment that I'm okay not knowing for a little.
Yeah. Now, I actually have a question about your creator own. You wrote a story called The Oz. Where did the idea for that come from? Because it's very interesting concept for the Wizard of Oz, right? And it's reimagined the Wizard of Oz in such a way.
Yeah, boy. So, we're going to be doing a third Kickstarter for the OZ later this year, I believe. We're still kind of figuring out the timing of all of it. Ruben Rojas is literally drawing his last 2 pages right now. And beyond that, it's just kind of staggering out that Kickstarter so that it doesn't get cannibalized by any other books that are coming.
So you self-published it too. It didn't go. You self-published it.
I self-published it over Kickstarter. And so, when you're doing Kickstarter, you want to do the full court press on promoting it. And so I, with like Speed Racer coming out at a certain point, with Captain Planet coming out at a certain point, it's one of those, like, I don't want to hurt both books.
Right.
Like, by doing a Kickstarter in the middle of like Final Order cutoff.
You really have to promote that. Right.
Yeah. So that's really the only reason we haven't done the third one yet. Because we are far enough along that it would be no problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, that book, I pitched it as Mad Max meets The Wizard of Oz, and the way that came into being was it was one of my first books first concepts I came up with after my breakout book Spencer and Locke, and that book I had no idea what the reaction was going to be, and I was like, if this book was so hard to put together, and it took so much energy and time and focus, that if people hate this book, there's no way I'm doing it again. Like I will say I did my one book, and if everyone hates it, I'm done. Thankfully, people really like that book. And so, as I was working on the sequel for that, I started thinking about like, what else do I want to write, and I love playing around in different genres. So I kind of just wrote down like the food group list where I was like, okay, like what's a romance, like what's a take of a romance that would work in the direct market. So that became Good Apple. I was like, what about something sci-fi? And so that became my as yet unreleased Grand Theft Astro. I thought about, time travel, which actually wound up becoming what turned into Savage Avengers. I had a creator-owned thing, with a similar concept before that. And so I was like, fantasy, what are some other parodies that I can do? I did Calvin and Hobbes with Spencer and Locke. So I wrote down fantasy, I was thinking, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Wizard of Oz. And as I had written down Wizard of Oz, my cursor kind of got stuck in the middle of the word Oz. And I kind of thought, I looked at it for a second, and then I was just like, what if Oz was an acronym?
Okay.
And I was like, what could it be an acronym for? And then I thought occupied zone. And then suddenly I was like, oh, that's the story. Like the cover image from that first issue pretty much hit me like a bolt of lightning, where I was like, oh, it's Dorothy as a soldier, like it's post-apocalyptic Oz. You've got this junkyard juggernaut version of like the Tin Man behind her. And that's when I realized, like, for me, I have strong opinions about gritty reboots, which you wouldn't think, having written a bunch of gritty reboots. But my thinking is things like, like Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, like that sucks. Like, I'm sorry. That just like, that feels like, it feels very sophomoric. It's just like, let's take like the innocent thing and like dirty it up, Yeah.
It's very gimmicky.
It's gimmicky. And for me, my opinion is, if you do a gritty reboot, first off, it has to ultimately be a redemptive climb. Like I think you can start grim if you work your way up. But also I think there needs to be something in the core text that justifies it. So for for Spencer and Locke, for example, that came from, Calvin and Hobbes, like he so vividly imagined Hobbes. And I was an only child for a long time until my siblings were born just shy of my 9th birthday. And so I didn't make up a best friend. I had real friends. So what if that vivid imagination is really like a darker pathology? It's a coping mechanism for like a particularly harrowing childhood. And that became Spencer and Locke. And for the Wizard of Oz, I just thought, like, Dorothy like kills 2 wicked witches in like a week and gets like the wizard to leave. And they portray that as a happy ending. And meanwhile, I'm like, that's Baghdad. Like that's the Iraq War, is that, it's a regime change with no plan. and of course that's going to turn into a power vacuum and a struggle to control that. And so the parallels between that and the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, like really kind of the parallels felt pretty apparent to me. So that's kind of how that book came together. I wound up developing it years ago for a publisher, and we made it to like the 1 yard line. There happened to be another fantasy war book that they picked up instead. That was critically acclaimed. I don't blame them. The creative team had more experience than I did. But I remember that editor told me afterwards, saying, hey, I know this is disappointing, but you should not give up on this concept. It's really good. And that was like encouragement he didn't need to give, but it was extremely important, because then, that gave me kind of the gumption to like find an artist, and then that self-published the thing on Kickstarter, and we won a Ringo Award for it, and I was stunned, the fact that like a self-published Kickstarter book can win an industry award like that. But I think it does speak to the talents that Ruben Rojas and Whitney Kogar and Dave Hopkins brought. to that book. So I'm really proud of it, and I can't wait for the third one to come out. Like I said, it's been long written, and Ruben is just drawing his last couple pages now, and it's just a matter of finding the right window that doesn't like cannibalize that book and any others.
Where can people get the first two Oz books?
My web store is down at the moment, but once I fix it,
Okay.
yeah.
So keep an eye out for that.
Keep an eye out for the web store. So what do you have? Go ahead. I'm sorry, Brian.
It's okay. I wanted to ask you about your Cthulhu story.
Oh boy,
Was it the Cthulhu's
Master Cthulhu? Yeah,
Brian loves Cthulhu.
I'm a huge H.P. Lovecraft fan. So
yeah.
now, what exactly what drew you to Cthulhu? What was it? Just sort of
Well,
like pop culture and
you know what happened was that was in the Cthulhu is Hard to Spell, Volume 3, Battle Royale anthology, and I'm friends with Russell Nahelty, who organizes that anthology. And he'd already done Volume 1 by the time he and I met. We're both locals in the Los Angeles comic scene, and he was pounding on my door to do Volume 2, and just the timing of it all. I was working on Spencer and Locke 2 and going to the chapel pretty much simultaneously. And I think beginning work on the OZ. So it was one of those, like, I was a little slammed on time. And I didn't know Lovecraft that well, to be perfectly transparent.
Me neither.
So Russell sold me on it, though, once they were working on their third volume, is that he's like, Lovecraft is popular, Cthulhu sells itself. And you know, when you hear that, like, you're like, oh, like something that sells itself. And so I did like a little bit of some research on like Cthulhu and Lovecraft and like kind of what that type of eldritch horror means. And you know, I was lucky that I'd worked with an artist named Mon House. He did variant covers on Spencer and Locke and Going to the Chapel, and he and I are still very friendly. But we'd never done interiors together. And so I was like, hey, like, I have this kind of, would you want to do a Lovecraft story with me? And so, you know, I love genre splicing, mashups. And so I was like, you know, it'd be cool to do like a martial arts Lovecraft story, and the idea of like the Master of Kung Cthulhu.
Yeah, that's great. I love the title.
Yeah, you know, and Mon did an incredible job with the artwork on that. And I'm really pleased with how that story came together. So yeah, you know, thank you for asking. Most people don't ask me about that one. But yeah, it was a really fun story, and I feel like that was kind of one of the stories that kind of helped me hit critical mass over at Marvel. Was sort of the summer where I was doing a lot of anthology work. I was you know, coming out with Scouts Honor at the same time. You know, and I was sort of, I think I was pounding on Marvel's door like every other month, being like, hey, I have a new thing. Hey, I have a new thing. And so I think finally we're like, let's just hire him because he's not going away. So yeah, I had a lot of fun on that story.
So my question, and this will be my last comic book question, I promise you. The interview before you, we did a couple of weeks ago, we interviewed Stephen Grant, and Stephen Grant.
Yeah, lovely guy.
Lovely guy. He wrote the Punisher limited series that really made Punisher what Punisher is today. Your limited series of Punisher was a different Punisher. It wasn't Frank Castle. So you introduced us to a totally different Punisher. How did that come about?
That came about through Savage Avengers. You know, I had written Jake Gallows, the Punisher 2099, in that run, and I had pitched Frank Castle actually in my roster for Savage Avengers, and that's how I found out he was going to be off with the hand in Jason Aaron's run.
Okay.
And so it was one of those things. Jason's run was about like 2/3 of the way through. When Marvel, when Tom, my editor, said, listen, like I was about halfway through Moon Knight City of the Dead, maybe a little less than half. And I'd done Fantastic Four and I'd done Avengers Unlimited. I'd been doing a lot in that office. And Tom said, listen, like, we really liked how you wrote Jake Gallows in Savage Avengers. And we are going to introduce a brand new legacy Punisher. And we wanted to see if you would be interested. And I'll be honest, there was definitely a degree of trepidation to taking on the assignment. You know, I feel like the Punisher is a tough character for me, because he's so stoic, and because, you know, there's so much expectation on not just the action, but what's the tone of the action. You know, how violent do you want this to be? And knowing that there's so much real world controversy surrounding the character.
And he's a hard character to get people to like these days.
Yes. And so, it's one of those things that hearing this idea of sort of adding to that tapestry of like knowing that like of course Frank is going to come back, like it's comics. If you don't think he's coming back, I've got a bridge to sell you.
Right, yeah.
But sort of this idea of like who's the Danny Ketch to Frank's Johnny Blaze. And so that was like an interesting idea. And I was thinking like it'd be cool to kind of do like a little bit more of a John Wick kind of thing, like the gun fu of it all. And it was one of those things. It was tricky though, because knowing that we only had 4 issues to tell that story, and figuring out how do we tell a story that feels like a Punisher story, but at the same time kind of like puts the character on a little bit of a higher shelf so that like bad actors in the real world can't emulate him. Not putting him as a member of like a known military branch because we don't want real life people claiming ownership. Giving him slightly elevated weaponry so you can't walk into a Walmart and walk out thinking of the Punisher.
It's kind of sad that's how we have to think about the Punisher.
And
you have to worry about that.
Knowing that like that is a character that like you ask any 10 comic fans what they should do with the Punisher and you're gonna get 10 very different answers.
Turn him into Frankenstein? Oh, sorry.
And so it's one of those things. I was really pleased with how that series came together, and I was actually really pleased with how it was received. I mean, up until Cable, Punisher was actually my best reviewed Marvel book, believe it or not. And so working with Dave Wachter and Dan Brown on colors, they were fantastic. They're some of the best artists I've ever worked with in Marvel, and Dave is a really excellent storyteller in the way that he paces things. And so he was actually able to take my scripts and really kind of break them up, even to pace them out even better. And I think it was very much to the story's benefit. So, but it was tricky. It was challenging. I think speaking a little, going back to what we were talking about fans feeling like they can anticipate everything and not being necessarily present in it. Right. And knowing that like the way that the previous run ended on, it was on a very controversial note. I think there were fans who they just were not interested in a new Punisher just on principle, and there's only so much you can do. But I really appreciate that there were a lot of fans who were like, I don't know about this, I'm going to check this out, and then they read it and they're like, oh, this feels like an old school Punisher comic. And I was like, yes, because that's my ilk, that's where I come from. Like the idea of doing something that can kind of sidestep all the politics and just tell like a cool badass story about a dude with some like kind of cool guns, like that's a Punisher comic to me.
Right. Sure.
And so I wish I knew what plans, if any, with Joe Garrison or in the future. I'm unfortunately not privy to any of it.
Yeah.
We had talked in very preliminary terms about doing a new #1 after the miniseries concluded, but my editor Tom wound up getting drafted to take over the X-Men, and so those conversations receded pretty quickly, just because different editorial office who they had things they wanted to do. But it was a really fun experience, and I think I learned a lot from it, and a lot of lessons that I wound up bringing to Space Ghost right afterwards.
Yeah. So what do you have coming up in the near future? You're doing any conventions? You have any appearances?
Yeah. Let's see. As far as appearances go, I've got San Diego Comic-Con coming up in the summer. I'll be at New York Comic-Con later in the year.
We'll be there. We'll come over and say hello.
Yeah, please. I'll be doing Los Angeles Comic-Con as well. I will be appearing at hold on, let me find out what it is called.
Where are you located right now? Where are you?
I'm in Los Angeles.
Okay.
Let's see.
We're in New York, so.
I will be at the Peninsula Library Comic Fest, Comic Arts Fest, later this month. Okay. I think that's sort of my appearances. I'll be doing some signings for Free Comic Book Day as well in Los Angeles area. I'll be at Collector's Paradise in Pasadena and Golden Apple Comics on that Saturday, and then I'll be at the Comic Bugs location in Culver City on that Sunday.
Great.
So yeah, as far as my appearances go, I'm a little more limited this year just
Right.
because
'Cause you're
I've got a
working.
lot to write.
Right.
But as far as beyond that, what's coming up, Captain Planet comes out April 23rd. Speed Racer kicks off on Free Comic Book Day the following Saturday. Space Ghost, I believe, comes out that following Wednesday, issue 12.
Mm.
I believe it's that Wednesday or the following Wednesday.
A lot
And
going
then
on.
Cable 11 Chrome comes out, I think, a week or two after that, issue 4. And then 10 Ton Titan Terrier, that's my all ages graphic novel coming out through Paper Cuts. That's coming out in October. But yeah, and then I think Speed Racer itself, the series kicks off end of July. With
So
our
much
issue.
going on.
A lot going on. But it's all fun. These are fun books to work on, and yeah, it's just nice seeing people kind of respond to these things.
Yeah.
You never know what people are going to respond to. I certainly didn't expect it for Space Ghost. And so I hope that kind of passes on for Captain Planet and Speed Racer. But yeah, just keep him busy. It's
All we
the
want is good comics. You keep
it's a
writing
freelancer's
good ones,
favorite
we'll keep
four-letter
buying
word.
them. So usually what we do at the end of each interview is I ask 5 quick questions.
Sure.
Yeah. Just whatever comes off the top of your head as your answers.
Sure.
Nothing too complicated, usually.
No, they're not complicated.
So if you could work with any artist, living or deceased, who would you want to work with?
Boy.
Yeah, we said they weren't going to be complicated.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
complicated.
Like, I don't know. I mean, like, if I had a time machine and I could get like
anyone.
a cover from the Hildebrandt brothers, I would be
Oh, yeah.
there at an instant. I grew up with all the Marvel Masterpieces cards, and getting an Alex Ross cover would certainly make my life. Or a Frank Miller cover. I think as far as like artists are concerned, like for interiors, honestly, I've really enjoyed being surprised. It's not to say that I haven't been really lucky in terms of being able to sometimes shoot my shot. Like I got to work with Leonardo Romero on Moon Knight, Black, White, and Blood, and David Tinto and Speed Racer was a recommendation from me. But yeah, I don't know. It's like I feel like if I know them, then they're probably too big for me. But I think there's a ton of amazing artists out there. Jerome Opeña, Aquapel, those certainly would be super cool. Stefano Caselli, he'd be great. I love what Alessandro Capuccio, I think is how you say his name, is doing an Ultimate Wolverine. So there's a lot of cool artists out there.
That's good work.
See,
yeah.
they always come. See, it's always tough to get into it. And then once you get into it,
You're like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's
stop
like
naming. Yeah.
Well, who's your favorite X-Men?
Nightcrawler.
It's me. Yeah.
Nightcrawler's my favorite. Prior to the X-Men was kind of like my intro to the X-Men.
Oh, okay.
I was just the right age for it, and that production company wound up doing Captain Planet right afterwards. So yeah, I think he just encapsulates everything that's great about the X-Men. The fact that he's this guy who looks different, but he's got like the heart of a hero, and then seeing kiddies sort of be scared of him and then realize like who he is on the inside. I think that speaks to the corest of core themes of the X-Men, and so
But he's out now, diabolical looking. And he's actually the most pure of heart of almost all the characters.
Yeah. He's the fun hang of the
Yeah.
DC Comics Claw just says you can write any comic at DC. Who are you picking?
I'd love to write Suicide Squad.
Okay.
I think that'd be really fun. Flash would be fun. Shazam would be really fun. Superman. I'm sure if they ask Batman, like, how do you say no to Batman?
No, you get to pick.
How do you write a better Batman than what Dan Waters is doing in Batman Dark Patterns right now?
Oh, we had Dan on the show recently.
Yeah.
I mean, that.
I've told Dan. Dan knows how impressed I am with that book because I've emailed him a bunch about it.
The villain has been downright. It's scary. It's a downright scary villain in there.
Yeah, it's a great book. So yeah, I think any of those would be super fun. Yeah, so call me, DC.
Yeah, call DC. Give him a call. Last question.
Yeah.
Captain Planet becomes a movie. Who plays him?
Who should play the captain?
Can't be Don Cheadle. Anybody but Don Cheadle.
Maybe Matthew Bomer.
Oh,
Okay.
that's a great choice.
Now my wife's gonna watch this episode.
Matthew Bomer is I think I've always heard the story of how he's passed over for Superman because he was out.
Right. Yeah.
Or he was outed, as if I recall correctly, and so they kind of shied away from having like
which is ridiculous because the guy's a great actor.
And he's a really talented actor, but also there's something about him, and I say this complimentary, but like it's almost inhuman. Like there's something about him that glows. And I say this, and I worked as a Hollywood assistant, Matthew Bomer. I saw him on the lot that I was eating lunch at, and like I'll be honest, the cameras make him look ugly. Like, it's one of those things you see him in person, and you're like, that guy doesn't seem like he's one of us.
Right.
And I think there's that's an interesting quality for Cap, where he's not made out of flesh and blood like you and me. He's made out of like rocks and stone and ice and flame. This idea that he's not, he's like us, but he's not us. He's sort of a better version of us.
Yeah.
That's something that I think Bomer could do a really interesting job with.
That's a great choice.
That's
a really good choice. All right.
Okay, so listen, you're writing a whole bunch of comic books. If you ever need to include two guys who do YouTube, we're our images are free.
You can do
whatever you want.
Drop a plane on us. It doesn't matter.
Swept up in a typhoon in Captain Planet. You guys are by go-to.
We don't look this good in person, so
Matthew Bomer effect.
The opposite.
Yeah.
Well, no, but thank you, fellas, so much for having me.
Thank you for taking the time to come on.
Good talk.
Appreciate it. If you want to come back on when you have the project coming up later on, we do the Kickstarter. We love supporting Kickstarter. We love independent, right? We've had a couple of people on. We've got their Kickstarter, to the very end, actually. Joey Esposito's recent Shit Kickers.
Oh, Joey's great.
No, we love Joey.
Oh, Joey's great.
We absolutely love what him and Sean did on the Pedestrian.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's great.
Joey just got Shit Kickers just got done through Kickstarter.
Oh, good. I'm gonna get my stuff.
Yeah.
Anybody watching, please tell your local comic shop you want to pre-order Space Ghost, Captain Planet, Speed Racer, Kibble 11 Chrome, 10-ton Titan Terrier. It keeps my puppy fed and kibble. Kids me.
Listen, David, I don't want to tell you that we have a whole bunch of comic shops that actually watch us because we have a lot of friends that own comic shops. So there's quite a few comic shops that watch our show because so you guys can order them.
But thank you guys so much for having me.
Thank you for taking the time. Ever want to come on again? Open invitation anytime you want.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll send this out to you when it's done. And
okay. Yeah, tag me. I'll make sure I share it.
Very good.
Wonderful.
Take care. David, thank you so much.